Okay, let me try and bring this up to date and show you where this video is at. About a couple of weeks ago, the YouTuber SamiZataari made a video about the problem of evil and saying the problem of evil isn't a problem from the theist perspective, it's a problem from the atheist perspective, because in his view, atheists are unable to define the term in any kind of consistent or coherent way. So I thought, well, I've got to respond to this, and I tried to define or give a definition for evil from a consistent, coherent point of view, and then look at how those kinds of definitions tend to be applied. Well, I'm pleased to say that Sami a couple of days ago made a response to my video. Unfortunately, this whole thing has all gone slightly wrong. Sami's made a very robust response, quite an interesting and worthy critique of an argument. But it isn't the argument that I've made, and this is because of a misunderstanding, and I'm sure it is a misunderstanding. It's not one of these cynical misrepresentations of an argument so that he can answer the argument that he wants to answer. I think he genuinely misunderstands the point that I was making, and he's probably not the only one. There may be other people out there. So what I want to do is I want to play you what Sami thinks of my argument, and then I'm going to play you what I actually said, and then I'm going to explain where I think the misunderstandings develop. But before I play Sami, all the way through Sami's video, he talks about society defining what is evil. He claims that this is my argument, that society defines what is evil, and that each society is localized and defines for itself, within itself, what is evil. That isn't the claim that I made. I understand why Sami thinks that. It's now going to become clear. Let me play you Sami first, then I'll play you a clip of me.
Your video basically proves my point that you atheists have a problem with the issue of evil, that you can't give a proper, consistent response to this problem. I mean, at the end of your video, you summarize your main argument, and you summarize by saying that at the end of the day, evil is subjective, and the subjective term of evil is defined by the society. Hence, society defines what is good and what is bad.
Okay, well, Sami's actually given us a few clues there. He says that if you look at the summary at the end of my video, I summarise this argument that I've made, that I'm making this claim that society defines what is evil. So what we can actually do is let's have a look at the summary that I make at the end of the video, and let's see what I actually said, and maybe try and work out where Sami's misunderstood what I've said. And I offered you an argument for the opposite. I hope I've made half of that argument. The half of that argument is that a subjective approach, the terms are defined within the population, and those terms cannot go outside of that population. Okay, well, I don't think I need to go any further than that. It's clear in my mind the misunderstanding that Sami made. He's just a shame that he then ran with it all the way through his video, which renders really a lot of the arguments he made as irrelevant to the video that I'd made. Good arguments though they were on their own terms. I said defined by the population. Sami has understood that to mean defined by society. It's true that sometimes we do talk about the population when we mean society, but that isn't what I meant. What I meant was populating something with data, populating something with examples. We populate graphs with data, we populate tables with data. So the difference between what I was saying and what you're claiming that I'm saying, Sami, is that you're saying that evil is defined by society. I'm not actually. I'm saying that it's defined by each individual. And each individual has a population of examples that extends way beyond his... Well, it might not do if you live in a little village, maybe in some isolated tribe in South America or New Guinea, then your population of examples may not extend beyond your society. But for me, I can't help but extend it beyond my society. I'm including people like Hitler and Genghis Khan and Stalin who aren't in my society. In fact, they don't even live anymore, Sami. I'm including people like the Prophet Muhammad and Jesus, and we don't even really know what they were like. But I can include in part of my population of examples the portrayals that we have of them. There are people like Gandalf and Sauron, Sami, and Bilbo Baggins that definitely didn't exist. These are fictional characters, but I can include them as part of my population of examples. And using this huge population of examples that we have, and it's growing all the time, and in 100 years' time it'll be even greater because there'll be even more history to look back upon. Using all of those, we can formulate our own definition of evil. And once we've formulated our definition, then we can again use that population to define exactly where amongst any given population of people, any given society, we define the behaviour as becoming evil. We can look at what kinds of behaviours we're going to personally define as evil. Now, where society actually comes in, Sami, is that in some way we have to amalgamate all our individual definitions of evil, the same as we do with every single thing else within society. And society seems to work on some kind of happy consensus that most people are willing to subscribe to. Most people are willing to work with similar definitions of terms like evil and apply similar kinds of cut-off points as to what would constitute an evil act and what would constitute a good act. There are some people who disagree with us, Sami. Maybe their cut-off points are totally different, or maybe they have a totally different definition of what constitutes evil in the first place. And this is where society kicks in and overrules those individuals. And then within societies we have organisations like the United Nations that do exactly the same thing. They look at the different ways different societies act and act on societies that are totally out of line with all the other societies. If we had this kind of objective definition that you talk about, none of this would be necessary. We could actually have an anarchic society because everybody would be arriving at the same kind of definitions and all countries would be arriving at the same kind of definitions. That really doesn't happen. And so we have to have this idea that the majority who subscribe to similar definitions and similar boundaries set the terms for those that don't. Set the terms for those roguish people who have arrived at different conclusions or choose to define the word in a different way. And this is an interesting thing, this thing of defining the word in a different way. One of the things you gave is, well, what about if society in 100 years' time chose to define rape as okay, as not evil? But the interesting thing is, Sami, if me and you are going to discuss have a discussion, the terms we use have to have broadly similar definitions. If you're going to totally alter those definitions, say the definition of evil so that rape was consistent with your definition, say, and not consistent with mine, then we've got a bit of a problem, haven't we, Sami? Because what we're doing is we're actually using the same word but we mean totally different things. It's like I gave you the example in the previous video, the idea of richness and Bill Gates being rich, for example, and nobody would deny that, but actually some people do. Some people would say, well, actually no, I don't think Bill Gates is rich because I think richness is a spiritual thing, and I actually think SamiZataari is a richer man than Bill Gates because he's rich spiritually. Now, who's to say who's right? Me, who says no, Bill Gates is richer because he's got more money, and somebody saying SamiZataari is richer because he's spiritually richer. Well, in actual fact, both of us are right within the terms of the definition of that word that we are using. But we're having a difficult and incompatible conversation because we're using such different definitions. So with a word like evil, the first thing we have to do is to agree on a definition. If two individuals or if two societies, two nations cannot agree on a definition, well then they're going to be talking at cross purposes. So they may choose to agree on a definition purely for the basis of this conversation. Christ, Sami, if you look at any kind of international legislation, nearly every piece of international legislation is filled with documents hundreds of pages long defining terms so that everybody is absolutely clear of what is meant by that term. And when you talk about rape being defined as not evil in 100 years' time, well, yes, maybe you can cobble up some kind of definition of evil that won't include having sex with somebody against their will and causing them all kinds of mental suffering and torment. Maybe you can, but your definition of evil is going to be so different from mine that we're practically using different words. So this is the important thing to get our heads around, Sami, is that there's two possible disagreements that we can have when we're talking about a descriptor such as evil. The first is this definition. Problems with having different definitions. You and I could have different definitions, or people within a society could have different definitions, or people around the globe could have different definitions. If you're going to talk together, you need the same definition. Otherwise that descriptor just misleads. It doesn't describe, it misleads. But even if we have the same definition, we can still run into disagreements. And one of the arguments you gave it is I put this point of unnecessary suffering, and you've said, well, what's unnecessary suffering to one person might not be unnecessary suffering to another. Well, that's true. But that's not a problem with my definition. That's just the way these things work, Sami. And this is a different type of thing that even if we have the same definition, we might still disagree on where we're going to apply it. You and I, Sami, may have exactly the same definition of what constitutes warm water. But if I start heating up a pan of water, it might get to about 31 degrees. There's me and you, Sami, and we've both got our fingers stuck in the water, and it gets to 31 degrees, and you say, well, I'm happy, that's warm water. But I hold off a few more degrees, Sami, and it's only at 35 degrees that I say, no, I think it's warm water now. Now, is that a problem? Does that mean that warm water doesn't exist anymore? That it's just utterly redundant as a term because there's no objective, absolute definition of what constitutes warm water? Of course it doesn't. It's not a problem. There are two types of disagreement that we could have over warm water. I could think that warm water is water that's got sharks in it, Sami, and you could think that it's water within a certain temperature range. Then we've got major problems. But even if we agree that it's water within the same temperature range, we can still have this kind of relativistic disagreement. And that's what happens with this unnecessary suffering. Who's to say what's unnecessary suffering? Exactly. So that's always a discussion that we're going to have. That's always a debate that's going to be played out. And yes, different people and different societies are going to arrive at different conclusions. Big fucking deal. They're going to arrive at different conclusions. Just the same as we do with every single thing else. Why, Sami, should evil be any different from all these other things? Why can't it be relativistic the same as all these other things? Why is it suddenly a huge problem when we're talking about evil and not a problem when we're talking about everything else? That would be my question for you. Why is that a problem? The last thing you want to come up with, just a tiny thing, you talked about BDSM basically. I'd given this definition of causing suffering because you enjoy causing suffering. You said, well, what about BDSM? Does that make that evil? Yeah, well, I did say there was a few holes in my definition. That's one of the holes. But I'd have to give you a definition that was this long, Sami, not a definition that was that long. If I could include all these different caveats, it would look like some kind of incredible legal document with paragraphs and sub-paragraphs and all sorts of things. I was assuming that wasn't what you wanted, Sami. But I accept that would be one of the holes. Well, I hope that's cleared up my video, Sami. You had this idea that society defines what is evil. That's not what I said. I said it was defined by the population. But that's the population of examples, that's a population of data that you base your decision on, not society. I hope that's cleared that up, Sami. Okay, well, thanks everybody for watching this video, and maybe I'll hear back from you, Sami. If I don't, well, we're going to get your objective. You tell me you're going to give your objective definition from a theistic perspective, so I'm looking forward to hearing that one, Sami. Take care for now, Sami. Take care for everybody else. Thank you for watching this video. Bye for now.